Welcome to Eastern Hospitality. I'm Father Moses from Holy Resurrection Monastery in St. Nazianz, Wisconsin.
And I'm Mother Gabriella from Christ the Bridegroom Monastery in Burton, Ohio. And today we're going to be talking about some feasting and fasting tips and just some different thoughts that we've had from our monastic experience that we're looking forward to sharing with you today.
As we all know, we're coming into the season of the Great Fast, one of the 4 fasting seasons of the year. The other 3 being the Apostles' Fast, the Dormition Fast, and the Nativity Fast.
So what is fasting?
Fasting is abstaining from certain foods, limiting what we eat in order to help us increase our prayer life, to become closer to God, to be more reliant on God. In the West, they often use the terminology abstaining, whereas we would use the terminology fasting and abstaining the same. They mean things different.
Right. So like fasting and abstaining in the West would be, like you're saying, 2 separate terms. So to fast would be not to eat.
Not to eat at all,
and
whereas we use the term much more loosely. Fasting means not eating certain foods as well as limiting how much we eat.
Versus they would say abstaining would be like when we don't eat meat or dairy or whatnot. Okay. So some of the things that we fast from are meat, dairy, wine, oil, depending on the day of the week, depending on the fast, kind of dictates the typicon, the rule of the church, and as well as the monastery, dictates what it is that we fast from and when we fast. And those depend on, like I said, the fasting period or what kind of feast is happening that day. So everything is very much tied to the church and to what season it is. Everything, we don't fast just based on what we desire. It's with and in conjunction with the church.
So we're fasting all together. It's a community effort.
Right, exactly.
So other than the main fasting periods of the year, we also abstain or fast on Wednesdays and Fridays.
So is that, what is that, why do we do that?
In remembrance of, usually Wednesday is the day that Christ was betrayed, so that's a sorrowful day, a day that we remember that, so we fast. And Friday, the day that Christ was crucified on, is remembered through fasting.
And really we're doing that in order to kind of move, just as we move in and out of the fasting periods, we're moving in and out of those fasting days to remind us.
Throughout the week, exactly.
To remind us of Christ and draw us back. So there are a number of reasons that we fast. One of them would be to remind us of our primary dependence on God alone. Our fasting draws us out of ourselves and reminds us of our poverty and reminds us of what Jesus said in the Gospel of John, which is, apart from him we can do nothing. And you can see in any monastery, the first week of Lent, as soon as we're deprived of meat and dairy, we remember our utter dependence on food and that need to be realigned with Christ and come to understand ourselves as utterly poor.
One of the other reasons that we fast is, as baptized Christians, we're all called to participate in the ascetical life of the church. And the 3 pillars of our ascetical life are fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. And they have to be tied together. One without the other, everything goes off kilter. So when we fast, especially during the Great Fast, we increase our prayer life as well. The services in church get longer and more intense. We should take more time in our private prayer life. And out of that comes the charity of almsgiving, whether it's giving money to the poor or to the church, or working with the poor, or anything that we do for others is part of that almsgiving.
And we're all, it's not just the monks and the nuns
That's right.
who are called to fast. Everyone's called to fast. That baptismal call to holiness is really more on a scale, not so much in a we're in one box and lay people are in another box. It's this scale of asceticism where everyone's called to some degree to deny themselves, to fast, to some degree to pray, and to some degree to give out of that prayer and fasting to others.
Exactly. Everyone's not called to the life of a monk or a nun.
Right, exactly. But they can all give something in their state of life.
Exactly. As St. John Chrysostom says in his famous Paschal homily that's read at Matins on Pascha, and he talks about those coming at the 11th hour can still celebrate the feast. But in reality, it's much better and more enjoyable to celebrate the feast if you've prepared for all of the fast.
Exactly. It's kind of hard. It's kind of like a runner trying to jump into a marathon without having without having properly trained. You know, it's the monk who's just started Lent and your legs hurt from doing too many prostrations, but by the end you're ready.
You're ready
so
to
you
go.
Need that. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's that preparation helps you to better enjoy the feast, and the fast is what we need in order to do that.
The bite of the first Easter egg
Oh,
tastes so much better
Yes.
after having been 40 days without it.
absolutely. And sausage.
That's
All the
right.
bacon.
All the bacon. So we've come up with a list of do's and don'ts, kind of some guidelines, not hard and fast rules, but some tips to help you get through the fast. And the first one being, it's really important if you're just getting into fasting and starting out, not to try to do the full monastic fast
Oh, no.
right off the bat. You don't want to burn out in the second week and throw your hands up in despair and be done. It's much better if you start small. If you've never fasted before, maybe the first Lent, no meat. And the next fasting period, add in no meat and no cheese. And take it in steps and build up to closer and closer to the monastic ideal.
Exactly. You want an attainable goal. You don't want to set the bar so high that you're not able to slowly increase. Just like if you're training for something, you don't jump in and start benching 350.
Exactly.
You have to work yourself up to it. Or the monastic fast is really, it's like setting a goal for yourself. Or if you play darts, it's the bullseye that you're aiming for. But the likelihood of hitting a bullseye in your first shot's not really, well, maybe for some, but for most, not so much. It's that continual trying and knowing that you're most likely will fall, but you get back up.
Right.
So,
another point that I think it's important to remember is not to judge other people, whether they're fasting more than you or not as much as you. It's important to keep your eyes on your own plate. Don't look at what anyone else is doing. Don't be judgmental. It's important to look after yourself. Everyone's on we're on the same journey in different places.
Yep.
So.
Exactly. But it is important though to be aware of what you're eating. You don't want to be overly scrupulous. You don't need to spend 6 or 7 hours at the grocery store reading every label, but to be aware of some things that do include maybe what you're fasting from, just to keep that in mind.
Right.
But ultimately, charity rules. If you show up at someone's house and they've prepared food for you, it's not for you to refuse that. That's given out of the charity of God, and you accept that as you accept it from Christ. And that's okay. We don't seek those opportunities,
right.
but when they happen, you receive it, and it's part of the fast.
As St. Seraphim Sarav says, if you show up at someone's house on Good Friday and they serve you meat, you follow the rule of hospitality and you eat it.
Exactly. Another important point is not to start fasting until you've consulted your spiritual father or your pastor, and if you have any health concerns, a physician, just to make sure that you're ready and able to do that. It's very important. Fasting is not it's meant to train the body, it's not meant to obliterate the body.
Right.
It's important to remember that we are body and soul, and that you need to be aware of how that's going to affect you spiritually as well as physically.
I think it's also important to remember we don't fast alone. We fast as part of the church. So find someone to fast with. Whether it's your family, fast together, set guidelines that you can all attain. A friend, if you live by yourself, find someone that you're going to be fasting with. going to hold you accountable, you can hold them accountable and work together.
Exactly.
One of my worst Lents was a Lent where it was probably a Lent where I best kept the rules, but it was the worst Lent spiritually. I was so hung up on following the rules, and I did such a good job of avoiding everything that I was supposed to and only eating things on days that it were allowed, that I was just so hung up on that that I had no interior growth. It was just horrible. It was the worst Lent ever. But I kept all the rules. So you really have to couple the prayer with the fasting and the almsgiving to go together. Don't just get hung up on the rules of the fast. Make it a good Lent. Make it a happy Lent. Lent shouldn't be a miserable time. It's a time where we're looking forward to that joy of the resurrection and preparing for it.
For me, it's been the great part about the fast has been really entering into community life and fasting. Before I entered, a few years before, I started trying to keep the traditional fast at least as much as I could with no meat or no dairy. And at the time I was working as a tax accountant, so Lent always fell during busy season, and that's when all the free food comes to work, and that's when, you know, all of these things are happening. And it's a very busy time, so I spent a lot of time preparing meals, and I wasn't living with other Byzantine Catholics at the time, so I was really doing it a little bit by myself. I mean, I had other people, but not who I lived with. So they, of course, were bringing home the meat and the dairy, and I'm longing for that as I eat my vegetables and rice. But it really showed me the importance of community. So, you know, once you enter the monastery and there is no meat, there is no dairy, there is, you know, those things just aren't even there, it makes it a lot easier. And also you feel supported in what you're doing. So it really showed me that the importance of that communal aspect of fasting.
Well, I hope we've given you some things to reflect on, to pray about, to discuss with your spiritual father, and to prepare for the upcoming great and holy fast.
We look forward to seeing you next week, which will be our Meat Fair Sunday episode, which is airing on February 14th. We hope you have a great week, and we'll be praying for you.
You pray for us.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.